Parliament today, the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, they've been explaining to the Portfolio Committee on Energy about the processes used for the emergency procurement of power. The Minister, Gwede Mantashe, was meant to appear before Parliament to answer questions regarding the controversial Karpowership contract, but the Minister himself was not there. Environmental groups have strongly criticised the decision to use these power ships. It will give that company contracts granted under emergency conditions for a period of 20 years. They'll use floating power stations that use liquefied natural gas to generate electricity. Chris Yelland is the manager of EE Publishers, an energy expert. He joins us now. Chris, good afternoon to you. I mean, I know you've been speaking to the department about this in detail. It's a big decision, this emergency procurement. How do they explain the decision to get so much power from these car power ships?
Yeah, well, this is a question that is being asked now more and more widely, and I certainly asked this question myself when I interviewed the Deputy Director General of the DMRE, Jacob Mbele, as well as the COO of the IPP office, that's Maduna Ngubeni. Look, they have gone out to tender. They set certain requirements in the tender. They got proposals. They shortlisted a number of potential bidders, and they've awarded contracts to 8, of which 2/3 of what is being procured is coming from a single company called Karpowerships in 3 different projects. And there are now a lot of questions being asked about this because whilst it may make sense to rent a car for a week or 2 if you need a car in an emergency, it doesn't make sense to rent a car for 20 years. It's not the cheapest option, and it's not the most sensible option. It would be better to buy your own car and to enter into maybe a maintenance agreement with a manufacturer, but to rent power ships, which are intended for emergency conditions like war conditions, earthquake conditions, on a long-term basis, to be moored in the harbors of South Africa, polluting the atmosphere and creating a lot of noise for 20 years makes very little sense to most people. The department did give a lot of reasons why they, in their mind, thought it was justified, but to be honest, it was really most unconvincing to me for a number of reasons.
I mean, there are probably 2 things to this, and I mean, I'm going to come back to the length of a contract in a moment. But would it have been possible in this emergency situation to use more renewable energy sources? Now, I realize there's this issue of what's called biddable or dispatchable power. In other words, Eskom needs to be able to ring you up and say, we need this electricity now. That would mean, for example, at night, any solar solution would need to have battery storage along with it. And that's what it all means, and that's where it gets a bit complicated. Would it have been possible to do this on an emergency basis with more renewable power than is actually being involved in this emergency procurement program?
Yes, there is a very interesting paper that has been put out by a well-known energy analyst, Clyde Mallinson, which presents an argument of overbuilding much more wind and solar PV all across the country, backed up with significant battery energy storage that would deliver completely exactly the requirements of the risk mitigation IPP program. That is dispatchable power between 5 a.m. in the morning and 9:30 p.m. in the evening. And it would do this at a significantly lower cost per kilowatt hour. When I say significantly, I mean less than half the price, and meet the requirements of the RMIPPP specification, and deliver much more energy as well, and really would provide much more jobs and economic benefits to the country. South Africa is in dire need of energy at the moment, and this would deliver not only the energy of the IPP, of the risk mitigation IPP program, but much more as well, for much less in price. So there are alternative risk mitigation possibilities that can do much more at a much lower cost if one would approach it correctly with a systems approach, as opposed to looking at each of these projects as an island without being able to take advantage of the interconnected system in South Africa.
If your version is correct and that paper by Gwede Mantashe is correct, then that would mean this decision by the Energy Ministry to use these power ships is what the lawyers call legally irrational. It's the wrong decision. Are you expecting court action over this?
Well, yes, I am expecting court action, certainly on the environmental issues. On the question of irrationality, it is really a difficult one. You know, in embarking on a legal action, and I'm now setting aside the environmental issues, embarking on a legal action, one would maybe tackle it on grounds of due process. Did it follow due process? Was there an IRP? Yes, there was. Was there a ministerial determination? Yes, there was. Was that concurred with by NERSA? Yes, there was. Was there a competitive public procurement process? Yes, there was. Now, how are you going to challenge it? Was this process rigged in favor of certain bidders? Well, that's something that one could and would have to argue and present evidence. Was there corruption? Well, you would have to present really hard evidence on that. I think it is an irrational decision. I think there are better rational decisions, but there are arguments that the DMRE would make, but I don't think they are convincing. Ultimately, I do think it was not a rational decision, and perhaps it could be challenged on that. But I think the bigger challenges are going to come from the ability of these projects to achieve financial closure. And that means to get all the environmental permissions in place, to get the port authority permissions in place, to get a power purchase agreement for 20 years from Eskom, and all legal challenges in terms of appeals against environmental authorizations dealt with in time. By the end of July, there are questions as to whether it is going to be possible to achieve financial closure. Time will tell, and whether the banks, the financiers, are prepared to really risk their reputation, which from the outside would look to be an irrational and dodgy decision. This is what banks are going to have to decide before they give financial closure by the end of July 2021.
I mean, the environmental issue now, when it comes to the law, is really interesting because there does have to be a process, there has to be a sort of public hearing. This means that is really where any process can be attacked by environmental lawyers. And we saw this with the nuclear deal. I'm sure you'll remember it even better than I do, if you see what I mean. I mean, that's where it would seem the process might be vulnerable to a legal attack if someone wanted to go that route.
Yes, I agree with you, and that's where I think any legal process is likely to take place. The rest of the process will be fought out in the court of public opinion, where one is dealing with matters of reputation and ethics and ultimately the ability to achieve financial closure. But I think the legal action is probably, if there is going to be legal action, it's going to be around the environmental issues, and of course the appeals. The various appeals against any environmental authorization. Now, you know, a bank will be very reluctant to financial close on a deal like this if there are outstanding challenges or appeals in process, because they will not want to hand over the money to finance the deals, only to be found later, in a legal challenge or an appeal, that the project cannot proceed. This is exactly what has happened in the case of 2 coal IPP procurements conducted by the IPP office of the DMRE, where these appeals and legal challenges really ultimately scuppered the whole deal, and the banks did not achieve financial closure and in fact pulled out of these financing arrangements as a result of pressure being brought to bear by environmental considerations, climate change considerations, and exactly the same issues apply in this case.
Chris, what's your sense? Are we going to have these Karpowerships off the coast? Are we going to have them in Saldanha Bay? Are we going to have them in Coega? Are we going to have them in Richards Bay? Or do you think it's not going to happen?
I'm not sure yet. There are these challenges, and time will tell. What I am hearing via the grapevine is that the idea of 20-year contracts, power purchase agreements, might be renegotiated to a lower, a lesser time for the renting of these power ships, because ultimately these power ships are not ever going to be an asset owned in South Africa. They're going to be rented or leased from overseas owners at great cost. The fuel, which amounts for 2/3 of the tariff bid, so the tariff bid was around about R1.50 a kilowatt hour. Of that, R1 a kilowatt hour is the fuel cost, 100% imported, linked to the US dollar price of liquefied natural gas, linked to the US dollar to rand exchange rate, and linked to the carbon price, all of which presents massive upside cost risks, which will be borne by the customer in the tariff over the next 20 years as the rand weakens, as the carbon price goes up, and with the volatility of the LNG price in US dollars. This presents huge risks to the customer of electricity, and I think it makes little sense to enter into such a long power purchase agreement, and there may be options to reduce that power purchase agreement to a lower level. Of course, there may be negotiations about the tariff or the price by people who are going to benefit or not benefit if these power purchase agreements are reduced in time. So we'll just have to see how this plays out. It's a very interesting space indeed.
Chris Yelland, I do appreciate the time. Thanks very much indeed, the energy expert. Well, of course, a very interesting conversation. At Charlotte Maxeke Hospital in Joburg now, the Minister, Dr. William Kieser, he's been going there to have a look for himself at the damage caused by that fire. I think we can actually go live to that situation now. It looks like he's about to start speaking, people setting up for a press conference. Now, the various issues, of course, facing the Minister here. There's the cause of the fire itself, how long this hospital is going to be closed for. We were told at least until Friday. Also, then other conversations around where patients are being treated for the moment. And then, of course, what happened with the fire hydrants. That's one of